Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Shadow Dancer, The Secret of Shinobi, brought to us by Sega. Shadow Dancer is based on the arcade game of the same name. However, this version of the game is more of a sequel remake of that game, featuring similar gameplay but different level designs. The arcade game was released in 1989 and was actually ported to the Master System, but only in Europe and Brazil. There were some home computer versions of that game created. However, Shadow Dancer for the Sega Genesis and Master System, released in 1990, was actually the second game in the Shinobi series released for the Sega Genesis, following Revenge of Shinobi. So here we go with Shadow Dancer for the Sega Genesis. If you wait a few moments at the opening title screen, you'll be treated to the storyline for the game. After seeing the opening storyline, we're going to go into the options menu, and there's a few different selections you can make here. I'll be playing the game on the level 2 difficulty, I guess kind of like the medium difficulty. You can also play the game with shurikens or without them, and without them is a huge challenge, and definitely not recommended for when you first start playing. When you start the game, you start of course in level 1. There's 5 levels to the game, each broken up into different segments. In the segments, you must save a certain amount of hostages before you're able to continue. The good thing about it is, even though you have to save these people, they're pretty much right in your general path, so they're pretty easy to find. This game is pretty much a direct sequel to the original Shinobi arcade game, so that means one-hit deaths, with the only exception being when you jump on top of an enemy and you end up bumping into them, you won't instantly die, but any projectile or attacks from the enemy will instantly kill you. There are both male and female hostages to save, and when you save a female hostage, you actually get a power-up that remains with you for the remainder of the level. Of course, one of the other really cool things about Shadow Dancer is your dog, and you can actually use him by charging up the attack button and releasing it at the right moment after it's fully charged in order to attack an enemy nearby. He can only grab certain types of enemies, and other ones will end up hitting him, causing him to shrink down in size for a short period of time. After 2 pretty short areas in level 1, we now move on to the boss fight for the first level. The bosses each have a weak point, and you must attack that in order to actually do damage to the boss. For this first guy, you'll be attacking him directly in the head, and every time you're able to hit him, he'll get knocked back, and it'll actually stop his current move. He has 2 different types of attacks, the first one being rocks that fall down from the sky. Now these take up a good amount of space on screen and can be tricky to dodge, and then there's a fireball that he'll spit from his mouth, which you just have to jump over. Besides just our normal shuriken attack, we also have magic attacks that we can get, and we get them 1 per level. You press the A button and you'll do a massive move in order to take out all enemies currently on screen, and hitting bosses multiple times. Another cool trick with it is, if you feel like you're about to get hit by an enemy or a projectile in particular, you can use that magic to get rid of all the projectiles currently on screen. After each of the main levels, you will have a bonus level where you will have to fall from a building and take out all kinds of ninjas coming up at you. Hit as many of the ninjas as you can while falling, and you'll get bonus points for doing so. Next up is level number 2, the battle on the railway. As far as strategy goes in Shadow Dancer, it's kind of just like the Shinobi arcade game, replaying the levels over and over until you've kind of figured out where enemy placements are, so you can figure out the best strategies to get in and out, saving the hostages, and getting through the level. The worst enemies for me are the guys with the guns. They either fire standing up, kneeling, or laying down on the ground. And when they're on the ground or even kneeling, sometimes it can be really tricky to actually hit them. They fire in a consistent number of shots each time, and there's not enough time to jump in between bullets and still get to them. So what you'll have to do is sometimes wait for them to fire a few shots, and then they'll reload. When they do this, you'll have the opportunity to actually go past them. Just like with the bosses, if you get into a sticky situation, use your magic ability to wipe out all the enemies and projectiles so that you can keep moving on through the level. There are a few tricks to the game, especially when you're able to jump on top of enemies and bounce off of them, being able to just barely survive because they didn't actually hit you with one of their weapons. For example, doing it right here in between these two guys allows me to bounce off of them and be able to then get past to the right and grab the civilian before jumping back over the fence. In order to jump back and forth, you'll have to hold up on the D-pad and jump in order to go over the fence, and then down and jump to come back over the fence. A little bit weird the way that works, but it works just like all the other platforming does in the game. Area 2-3 has us battling our next boss. This boss is, well, a weird face in a giant brick wall who summons giant hands that fly out and try to grab you. The hands themselves will instantly kill you. The best strategy, though, is waiting for him to summon, and then when he gets those hands out, walk away on the far side of him. That way you'll avoid being actually hit by the hand. Thankfully, this is the only attack the boss has, so use your magic to help you take away a little bit of the health, and then jump up and hit him directly in the mouth a bunch of times in order to drain his health and move on to level 3. In the early levels of the game, I'm able to keep moving at a steady pace, even with enemies kind of catching up behind me. Only at rare opportunities will I have to really kind of turn around and take out the mass of enemies that are following me at that moment. Now, sometimes though, when there's a lot of course enemies on screen, the game will start to slow down, and when it does in this game, there's some pretty crippling controller lag, not allowing you to jump or attack for a moment while there's so many enemies. So, unless you can keep going the entire time and not stop, I recommend taking out enemies when they do start to group behind you and keep chasing you. Level number 3 is the Statue of Liberty. And Statue of Liberty, the level, acts a little bit differently. The first one, traditional of you going and collecting all the hostages, with the second one being a elevator style level. In this first stage, you'll have to work your way back and forth and jump up, and the screen will slowly scroll when you jump up to the next level. So you can leave yourself a little bit vulnerable when you first do it, especially if there's an enemy nearby that may fire a projectile. Instead of going all the way to the right, you'll jump up and grab the hostage to the left, then continue over to the right. Be careful jumping up here because there's a gun guy and a shield guy both waiting for you. Grab the hostage and then go over to the left to finish the stage. Because the game has that one-hit death, they keep all the levels relatively short, which is why the game is a challenge but not overbearing. Of course, now if you turn it up on the highest difficulty and turn off the shurikens, you're gonna have a really tough time, especially your first few attempts trying to get through. The elevator-like stage has you dealing with not only a helicopter that you'll have to jump over its machine gun-like fire when it goes overhead, first going from right to left and then a little bit later left to right, you'll also have a series of ninjas to battle. The ninjas take multiple hits, unlike a lot of the other normal enemies to deal with, and they come in a variety of colors, though they all pretty much work the same. And since the enemies do actually take multiple hits, you can knock them off the sides of the elevator. Just be careful, of course, when doing so. If you're focused on one particular enemy, you'll have other ones consistently coming up from the opposite sides. The best strategy is to alternate your attacks when you have enemies on both your left and right. Just like the other levels in the game, it's not a particularly long stage, but it can be a little bit difficult, especially if you don't have a lot of room to work with, and you're dealing with 3 to 4 enemies at the same time. Level number 3 is the next boss, and this guy is a bit of a challenge just to hit. You'll have to hit him in the head area, and he'll fire out giant blades that will then fly up in the air, land on the ground, and buzzsaw their way towards you. Keep your distance from him enough so that when he throws the blade out, you won't be directly hit by it when it lands, and then just do a simple jump over it. Every time he does land though, if you're able to hit him directly in the head, you'll negate the fire of one of those giant blades. Use your magic like always to do a significant amount of damage to him, and move on to the next level once he's fully gone. Admittingly, I do find doing the bonus stage after every one of the levels a bit boring after you've done it at least twice. The patterns for the enemies in the level do change up, but by the time we get to the third and fourth ones, I barely end up moving and just mash the button until the level's over with. Level number 4 is In the Darkness. The first area is a pretty typical level, having you inside of a cave with just different levels and enemies to battle. It's the second one that's really tricky. Be careful when jumping up the different levels here though. Wait for the screen to scroll so you know exactly what's coming up ahead. The guy right here on the edge with the gun is one of the worst enemies, and it hits me constantly because he's just able to hit you and you have a long walkway in order to get to him. I recommend if you can use your magic on that top level of that left side so you can hit all the enemies even on the right. After a couple of little platforms over some pits, grabbing the last hostages and completing 4-1. 4-2 though is where it gets really tough. You'll basically have spotlights here that showcase where enemies are located. Some enemies, like the gun guys, will actually hide in the shadows. We'll definitely be using our magic ability to take out a large chunk of them here. When on these stairs, use your dog to help you if you can, so you have an idea of where the next enemies stand. Wait for the other enemies to stop firing and have them to reload before jumping up to this platform and taking them out. This is one of the few times in the game I really do take my time, slowly making my way up each and every one of the platforms, battling the guys and making sure they're fully gone before attempting to go past. If you're able to get through 4-2, I say that's pretty much the toughest level to deal with. 4-3 has us battling our next boss. This one is a giant wheel. He has mainly one attack that he'll do. He'll turn solid red and then fire out a string of fireballs, which can be dodged one of two different ways. You can either crawl underneath of them if there's enough space, or you can just run to the opposite side of the screen to avoid them. However, your goal is to hit the center core. Every time you do though, you'll negate his upcoming attack, so you can prevent him from ever actually getting attack off as long as you're able to time one of those hits into the center of the wheel. He's actually probably one of the easiest bosses to deal with because he has a pretty big hitbox, and since you negate his attacks, you can prevent him from ever getting one off. Here we have one last bonus stage. I guess the time of day is now completely in the middle of the night, yet we're still able to, of course, perfectly see all the ninjas flying at us. Take out as many of the 50 ninjas as they're trying to bounce in between the buildings, and we'll move on to the final level of the game. Level number 5 is the Union Lizard, which is the name of the terrorist group that we've been taking out throughout the whole game. Unlike the other levels of the game that are broken up into different segments, this one, however, is one big level, including the boss, that's broken up into different rooms, each of the rooms containing a different type of enemy. The first one is the gun guys, and thankfully we get rid of these guys pretty quickly, and they're on that first screen. You'll still have to save a couple of hostages, sometimes per room, but they are right in your direct path. There's no variant to this. The second room has the spinning rolling guys. Recommended, of course, to take out all of them before attempting to jump up any of the platforms. They come in bunches, so you'll have a good opportunity to know where they're going to be. Room number 3 contains the weird green guys. Now, these guys are a pain because when you jump into them, instead of just bouncing off like other normal enemies, they're going to end up hitting you and cause you to lose a life. Thing is, though, the room is really short, and you can just barrel through it, firing just normal shurikens in front of you, and you shouldn't have too much trouble. The next room is tons of the ninjas of all the different colors. I usually just try to run and get past the level as quick as I can, because you'll have a few seconds each time they spawn, because you'll be able to jump over them and past them before they're able to phase in. However, I recommend taking your time a bit more in the next area with the black ninjas. These ones are a little bit tougher than the other colored ones, and I do suggest that you battle each group individually, kill them all before continuing on. You may also, if you want to, use your magic ability. The only negative is you won't get another magic ability before the boss, as you'll just go right into the final boss room itself. However, you really don't need it on the boss. The final boss is a giant shogun-like guy who sits proudly upon his throne. You can't hurt him until he takes off his helmet and he does his big attacks. He'll summon the black ninjas on the left and right pedestals. Deal with these guys individually, one at a time, and then eventually he'll summon 2 at the same time. Sometimes he'll do groups of 2 twice before he'll actually take off his helmet to actually attack you. When he decides to attack you, a giant beam appears from the top of his head, which you cannot hit him during, and then fireballs will rain down from the sky. Get in between the fireballs and deliver 2 hits as quickly as you can in order to move on to the next part of the fight. You're only able to get 2 hits in no matter what before his helmet will slam down on his head, and he'll go back to the creating the ninjas on the platforms. This is, of course, a pretty tough fight, being the actual final boss. I recommend with the ninjas, hitting them as soon as they drop down the platform and knocking them off screen, mashing the attack button until you know you've delivered that second hit, and then go to the opposite side of the screen to get ready for the other ones. When you get 2 or more on screen at once, go back and forth alternating your hits if you can. You want to make sure that the other ones don't sneak up on you. Sometimes you'll get lucky though, and one on the far side, instead of rolling or jumping directly at you, will instead try to do a little bit of a crawl walk towards you. And when he does this, you'll have opportunity to take out the other one before he gets to you. After one more set of the ninjas here, I'll be able to take these guys out and finish up the boss fight. After you deliver those final hits, you can sit back and enjoy the ending to Shadow Dancer for the Sega Genesis. So there you have Shadow Dancer. No real full ending, just kind of the credits with the New York City backdrop in the background, and you'll see the ninjas slowly scroll in along with the dog. Overall, Shadow Dancer is a pretty fun arcade-style game. If you are a fan of the original Shinobi arcade game, I can highly recommend checking out this one. I'm sure many gamers back in the day that played Revenge of Shinobi first and then played this may have been disappointed this game is just, well, a straight arcade-style game like the original Shinobi, and not a sequel with like a more driven-out storyline and more different abilities and more of kind of an action platformer that some of the other Shinobi titles are on the Genesis. However, with the added ability of the dog, I definitely find that Shadow Dancer is still a pretty good entry in the overall Shinobi series. After the credits have rolled by, the silhouettes will light up, showing you your character and the dog, and then it'll be to be continued in the lower corner. Unfortunately, up to this point, there hasn't been any more sequels in the Shadow Dancer line, though I definitely would welcome them. And with that, though, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoy.